the wealth income or the wealth inequality problem is not, you can't boil it down to just one thing. But what we can do, instead of saying that it exists, is you can use a thought experiment to see if it would naturally exist even if you cured it. So let's say that there's you and I in a society, and we're both going to start with zero wealth. The government has confiscated everything and said, now we have pure equality.
Yeah.
And you're both going to make $100,000 regardless of what job you have, and that's it. You decide to spend everything that you make. I decide to save 50% of what I make, and I invest it. Well, let's say I invested at 5%. Well, going into next year, you have no wealth. I have 50,000 of wealth. You make 100,000. I make 102,500 because I get 5% off 50,000. I've immediately created wealth inequality, and now we have income inequality. And I haven't done that because the system is broken. I've done that because we have free choice. So because we're free to choose, you made some bad choices. That much of wealth inequality over periods of 10, 20 years. Now, if you do this with somebody at 25 who lives a life of consumption to the time they're 45, and somebody else at 25 who lives a conservative life till they're 45, all of that money per year will compound to a significant difference at 45. The 45-year-old who spent everything that they make will have no wealth and will be living paycheck to paycheck. But you all started from the same point. If we want to get to a point where you don't have wealth inequality or income inequality, you must strip people of personal choice.
Sure.
I cannot allow you to make decisions that would be suboptimal. The state will make decisions on how much you consume and how much you save. And since I can't have you making bad investments, the state will be the only investment fund that exists. And since I can't have you buying depreciating assets with your consumption while the other person buys appreciating assets, I must dictate the basket of consumer goods that you will buy each year. The state apparatus you would need and the restrictions on freedom you would need to shut down inequality would be astronomical. So inequality is a natural outcome of freedom. It's a natural outcome of free choice. That it exists is not something that needs to be explained. That it exists is not something that needs to be cured. If it didn't exist, there'd be a problem. There would be a problem. Now, there's a belief that if you take a distribution, let's take the middle of a distribution, and you have tails in the distribution. The argument being put forth is that this tail of the distribution, the very wealthy tail, control way too much wealth, and this tail of the distribution simply doesn't have enough wealth. That's the big argument, that the disparity has never been greater. Okay, that there is wealth inequality should not be shocking.
Right.
If the disparity is really, really great, then we have to look at, well, what are the reasons? If you look at different countries in terms of the choices they have, that the citizens have, America truly is probably one of the freest countries on the planet in terms of the decisions you get to make in your life of what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it.
Definitely.
Well, the more freedom you have, the wider that distribution will become, and the higher the mean will be. So let's think about equities and bonds. Let's think about 30-day T-bills. What kind of variability does it have? It has a very, very tight distribution, but it has a mean that is left of the mean of equities. But equities has a very wide distribution. What happens, and this will happen in any society, when you decide to compact the tails of the distribution, let's take from the wealthy and let's bring this side of the distribution up. Take from the wealthy, bring this side. You will also shift the mean downwards. So you can expect that the average income, that's GDP divided by the population, the average income, if you attempt to shrink the distribution of wealth too much, average incomes will start to decrease to the point where you have no discrepancy in wealth, you will have a very poor nation.
Sure.
That's why socialism doesn't work, because only in socialism do you achieve true equality, when everybody is equally poor and equally miserable.
I agree with every premise of your example. And in the scenario with two people making $100,000, one person saving 50%, one person saving zero, which will always exist in a free society. One person is what I'll call being financially responsible, the other person is not. That's going to lead to wealth inequality. I also think, though, that there exists wealth inequality amongst two people who are as equally financially responsible. So consider a scenario where someone's making $100,000 and saves 20% of their income, and another person who makes $30,000, US dollars I'm talking, and saves 20% of their income. And because of the environment that that person grew up in, and they maybe had a lack of a mentor, when people don't have examples of opportunities, they don't see other people pursuing opportunities in their lives, and they didn't have an organization, say like Big Brothers Big Sisters, to give them a positive role model, they'll never take the steps to set themselves up to enter a scenario where they could earn an income, and they'll be stuck. And even if they become financially responsible at age 25, the scenario between those two examples is just going to widen because of the compounding returns of the person who earns a lot more money. So that to me seems like an issue where we have a portion of the population who isn't going to get to the point where they can earn an income to keep themselves close to equal in the amount of net wealth that they have.
Okay, so let's go back to what I said earlier with the U.S. being a good example. The U.S. is one of those countries where you will find the best of the best and the worst of the worst. That's the cost of having a wide distribution. That's the cost of freedom, is that you will get the best of the best and the worst of the worst. You can fix a lot of structural inequality at the cost of a narrower distribution. Now, if you look at things like innovation, which country produces the most innovation and has the most patents in the world? The U.S. by far.
Yeah.
By far has the most. If you look at where some of the top research universities are in the world, they're in the U.S. The U.S. has the best of the best. And again, the worst of the worst, but it has the best of the best because it allows for that wide distribution. If you narrow that distribution, you chop off the tails. You will chop off the tails.
Yeah.
So you can raise the bottom if your philosophy is we raise the bottom by lowering the top. And I find that liberals have this. When I say liberals, I don't mean it in a derogatory sense. I mean more liberal thinkers in terms of how you distribute in an economy.
Sure.
Have this idea that you create inequality by pushing from the top downwards to spread more of that out to the bottom. You will move output downwards. Output in terms of all sorts of things. Output in terms of innovation and creativity, because you will, at the margin, deter some people. Now, California is a good case in point.
Yeah.
Many people have left California for Texas.
I think it's a major logistics issue with U-Haul right now, because so many U-Haul vehicles are leaving California-based U-Haul facilities and going to Texas that U-Haul had to hire
people to bring them back,
to get them back, because it's like 2,000 families a day, I think.
Yeah. So this is a good case in point where a state has decided to go so far into the left that you will chase capital away, even from people who are liberal-minded. You will chase capital, and we don't live in the 1930s anymore. Some liberal thinkers like to say, well, look, the top tax rate in the 1930s was 90% and nobody left. Where were they going to go? Soviet Union?
Cuba?
I don't think so. South America?
Yeah.
I don't think so. China? India? There was nowhere to go. That's not the case today.
Right.
It's not the case today. So you can't look at something 30 years ago and say, well, money didn't leave. Well, half the world was communist. Where was it going to go? Money can leave now very quickly, and California is a good case in point. You lose one of those high income earners, you lose a significant tax base. So I would caution any any economy or any politician who would like to narrow a distribution, because you cannot narrow a distribution without moving the mean. You cannot take equities and make them less volatile but still get the return on equities. Your return is going to start approaching the return of bonds if you narrow the variability. Living in certain societies has opportunity and it has risk. The right tail of any distribution is opportunity. We don't really care about that. The left tail is risk. So when we talk about the risk of an investment, we're really talking about the left tail, losing money. The rest is opportunity. The US probably is the greatest place for opportunity, but also the greatest place for risk. If you're trying to limit the risk, you can't limit one side of a distribution. You will limit the other side of the distribution as well. So if you limit some of the risk, what you're saying is we're willing to limit some of the opportunity. That's not working out well for California.
Right.
Right. And that's on a state level. Now, yes, there are some people who, through no fault of their own, through circumstance or structural impediments, are in places where it is not as desirable or not as opportunistic as it could be. But we have already in place plenty of programs for that. We have plenty of philanthropy that happens in those particular areas. There is just a disagreement, I guess, on what role the state has to play in all of this. And I think that once the state starts determining that you should not have what you have because other people don't have it, I think that goes a step too far.
Yeah, that's fair. On the point, go ahead.
And if you are conservative with your finances for 20 years and somebody is profligate for 20 years, that was your money. At 45, you get to choose what you would like to do with that money. And if it's providing your child with a better future than you had, I don't see that as being privilege. I see that as merit. I see that you've earned the right to do that. It is a form of charity, except it's a very concentrated form of charity. Instead of helping out all these people, you're targeting your charity on one single person. What parent would not want to do that? I hate that term, oh, it's privilege. No, I don't have privilege. Most people I know don't have privilege. We have merit. There's a big difference between privilege and merit. And if I want to give all my money to one person, I should be able to, because I paid my dues on that money. I paid 53% to the state already. It's mine. This idea of confiscating 90% of your wealth when you die, I disagree with that.
I don't think that would fly anywhere in almost in the world. And if it was ever instituted, you'd just have people heavily avoiding it through whatever methods or loopholes would exist, or leaving the country quickly and having a domicile residence outside of the country, probably in the Mediterranean. It just would not be viable whatsoever. I'm with you there.
You'd have capital flight almost immediately.
Right.
On the point about, and I was going to ask you this later, but I thought of it while you were speaking, social systems and kind of the schools of thought that get structured around those. I want to ask about healthcare. And I've had this debate with friends of mine that I think the United States has the best healthcare system in the world. The common phrase around here is that the healthcare system is broken. I would say that it's 95% efficient and functioning very, very well, and that's evidenced by the quality and the types of procedures that you can get done now. The common counter argument, though, is that it's good here, it's better in Canada. We need a system like Canada. People can afford their health care. The number one example I hear is that the number one cause for bankruptcy in the United States is people who can't afford medical bills, which I think is accurate. And so we need a system like Canada where you don't incur the same out-of-pocket costs. And you're a Canadian resident, Mark, so what is your opinion on the healthcare system there and how it functions?
There's an old saying that says, if you want to know how much something costs, make it free. Because somebody somewhere has to pay for it. When it's free, it'll either be overused or it'll simply be undersupplied, one of the two. Let's separate those two things. Let's separate health care from healthcare system.
Okay.
I don't think the U.S. has a very good healthcare system, but it has probably some of the world's best health care. Most people of my stature, at least my financial
Sure.
stature, if something significant happens to us, we go to the U.S. in a heartbeat. If I felt that there was something significantly wrong with me, whether it be cancer or my heart or whatever, I'd be at the Cleveland Clinic like that, without hesitation, because I could get an appointment that very afternoon or tomorrow. I would, because it's for profit, I would be in. Here, I'd have to go to my doctor first if I can find a doctor. I've lived in St. Catharines now for 5 years, 6 years, still can't find a doctor because no one's taking any patients, because the healthcare system caps them at a certain amount of income, and that's it. So they have no motivation to take on any patients. You got to travel 100, 200 miles to get a doctor if you need primary care. If I felt that I needed this lump looked at, I have to go to my doctor, who then sends me to a specialist. Well, it could be 6, 7 months before I get in to see a specialist, because there simply aren't that many of them. Because again, income is capped. Once you get to the specialist, he says, well, we're going to have to get an MRI. Well, you got to find a hospital that has an MRI, and you got to get an appointment, which might be 9 months to a year to get an appointment, because society has to pay for it. There's no profit motive in it. So you don't have all these extra MRI machines lying around. So by the time I'm diagnosed, the oncologist then says, if we only would have caught it 6 months sooner. That's the problem with the Canadian healthcare system. Now, having cancer in Canada is just the same as having it in the US.
Right.
The health care you receive is top notch. It's good if you get it. If you get it, that's the problem. If I go to the emergency room with a cut on my hand, well, first thing, if I had a cut on my hand that needed stitches, I would just resign myself to the fact that I'm going to live with a scar. Because if I went to the emergency room to have it taken care of, the wound would heal before I actually got in. It would be a 12 to 14-hour wait before they saw it. Your wound would heal before you got in to get your stitches. So in the US, though, you just walk in and pay, and you can get it taken care of very quickly, because it is for profit. So there is a motivation to be customer oriented. Here, you're not a customer.
And I think
you're just a user of the system.
The fact that healthcare costs money, which under most insurance coverages, the majority of your healthcare costs would be, if you had major healthcare costs, would be covered by the health insurance. But the fact that healthcare costs money, I think, is a perfectly fine thing. And there's an argument that healthcare is a basic human right and it needs to be free. And I say, well, or it's a necessity, and so it becomes a basic human right and should be free. And so I would just point towards food and grocery stores and farmers and say, isn't food a necessity? Obviously it is. Well, does that make food a basic human right? Should it be free? And so the government needs to subsidize farmers, and everything you pick up at a grocery store should be free. That's nonsense. No, because
that's an interesting argument. I never heard that counter argument that food and water.
It's a necessity.
Should not be free. Listen, healthcare is not going to be free, even if you get it. Even if you get it for free, it wasn't free.
Right.
It had to be paid for, which means you may not be paying the bill at the counter, but you're paying it in your taxes. So what we have is, when you have socialized healthcare, is you have everyone paying into the system, whether they use it or not. That's the whole idea behind insurance, right? So we should say, well, that's just another form of insurance. In the US, everybody pays, for the most part, you pay for your own health care, unless, of course, you fall in certain income brackets. Then you have Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. I think the difference in the US is, even though you have the best health care in the world, you have some of the worst health outcomes in the world. That's a curiosity. Type 2 diabetes.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. is the leader in type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
Obesity. The U.S. is the leader in obesity. It is, I think, the big problem in the U.S. is the sheer amount of corporations that control your food supply.
Yeah.
And the amount of unhealthy food that is available, I think, is the biggest problem in the U.S. is just, you have terrible health outcomes, but great health care. Now, the argument is, yeah, but most of those people can't afford the health care anyways, which is why they have terrible health outcomes. Well, in Canada, everybody has access to this healthcare system, but we don't have the level of type 2 diabetes that America has.
Yeah.
That's not a result of our healthcare system. It's just you never end up in the healthcare system with diabetes to begin with. So there's something that is an input to bad health outcomes happening in the US that's not happening anywhere else, or that's happening minimally everywhere else. And I think it has a lot to do with the food, a lot to do with accessibility of getting good food.
Okay.
And I think way too many corporations controlling way too much of the food processing, and I think kind of bad outcomes. In Canada, for example, we have certain grades of foods that could never that are sold in the U.S. that would never ever get past certification
Really?
here. Yeah.
Okay.
That meat standards are significantly higher in Canada than they are in the U.S. Same with chicken, dairy. Most dairy, the standards are significantly higher. There's a lot more standards, consumer protection standards around food in Canada than there is in the U.S.
I
But
didn't know that.
again, now you bring in the argument about freedom. I'm not free to choose when the government says these are the only things you can buy. So it restricts my freedom
Yeah.
to some degree, but it also reduces the negative outcomes. Whereas in the US, you're free to eat whatever you want, but you have to live with the far left tail of the negative outcomes that come with it. So you can restrict, you can start dictating the types of food that people can buy at stores, but you would restrict some of their freedoms. You would bring both tails of that distribution inward.
Right. So it's maybe the opposite of something like the tobacco industry, where it's still obviously available, just with huge taxes and huge disclosures on the health problems with it. Rather, they're just saying, no, it's not going to be an option for you.
Well, yeah, here in Canada, it's the buy a pack of cigarettes, you pretty much got to know exactly what you're looking for and where to get them. I mean, they're not visible in any stores. They're hidden behind curtains. You can't even see them anymore. You can't have any kind of colorful boxes anymore. You have to have pictures on them of all the bad things that can happen to you. Like, I mean, it's pretty brutal if you want to be a smoker in Canada.
So one other, maybe the last liberal thinking type economic topic I want to ask you about is, it seems to me that there will have to be some type of universal basic income system or minimum government paid income in the United States in 10 or 20 years from now. We quickly sort of talked about the trucking industry. Tesla's making an electric semi. There are probably others as well. Many simple labor type jobs and some simple analytical type jobs or just computer jobs probably will be replaced by the advancement of technology. And I don't know that we'll be able to create an economy where as many jobs can be created by the amount that will be replaced. So it seems like you'd have way too many people on the street to me, and you'd get to the point where you have to pay them some type of income to prevent widespread suffering. Do you think that's a probability, and what do you think about that structure?
Yeah, if you look at all the social programs, and I'll take Canada as an example, all the social programs we have already, the argument is that MBI would replace all those social programs so that rather than you getting, housing, subsidized housing here, and you're getting welfare over here, and you're getting this and that, all that disappears, and everyone, all these people now get a basic minimum income.
Okay.
That it ends up being the same dollars, except now that you are taking a certain amount of uncertainty away. So there is an argument for it that it's not extra spending; it's just different spending. That if you're going to introduce that, you would eliminate all of these food stamps, you would eliminate a whole bunch of other things as well. I don't know that I like the idea of giving people money. just because they're in a bad position. That's not going to solve anything. It's, as that old saying says, you're giving somebody a fish. Well, next day you got to give them another fish, and then another fish, and another fish, until you actually just teach them how to fish.
Right.
So, for these jobs that are disappearing, I think that if you are willing to go to, it doesn't have to be university, any technical school, any retraining, any co-op program, any apprenticeship, anything like that, that it should be free. And yes, maybe then you qualify for this basic minimum income. But you cannot just sit at home watching TV and collecting taxpayer dollars.
Right.
If the taxpayer is going to step in and say, okay, you're in a bad situation, let us help you out. You don't get to just say, thank you, and kick back and relax and say, cash for life, I'm good. All I need is my Netflix and my one-bedroom apartment. That's all I need, and the taxpayer will take care of it forever. There has to be some way out. It cannot be a lifestyle choice, because if we're going to finance your lifestyle choice, why not finance my lifestyle choice? Why not finance everybody's lifestyle choice?
And that scenario you described, I think, would be detrimental to a society, even if only in terms of mental health, because I believe innately human beings need to be progressing in some way or working towards something to be fulfilled. And if you had 50 million or 100 million people 20 years from now getting paid to watch Netflix and sit at home, I think we'd see depression, anxiety, mental health issues through the roof. Maybe everyone could have an opportunity to become a psychologist then, because that career would be in such demand at that point. But it wouldn't mean good things for people as a whole.
No, I don't. I'm not against basic minimum income if there is a contract in place.
Yeah.
We will give you this and you will do that, because it will make you self-sufficient at some point, so you no longer need this. I get that welfare is not enough for somebody to not work and go back to school. I get that that's not enough. I really do. So we'll pay for your school. We'll pay for it. The taxpayer will pay for it. Not a problem. And we'll give you income to live on every single month. As long as you're doing your end of the contract, we'll live up to our end of the contract, because at the end of the contract, you become a contributor to society through taxes, which then pays it backwards for the next person who's going through. I fully agree with that. I'm all on board with having some kind of contractual relationship that says, you want to do better, we want to see you do better.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely against somebody who says, I don't want to do anything and I want you to pay for it. I mean, I'm socially liberal, but I'm fiscally conservative. That to me just seems like somebody moving into your basement saying, I'm never going to clean up, I'm never going to do the dishes, but I want you to cook for me and serve me all day long. Don't think so. Think so. Next for anybody listening, next time you think the government should do something, the government should pay basic minimum income, the government should provide health care, the government should provide paid daycare, I want you to just strike the word government out of that and put the word taxpayer. The taxpayer should pay for my child's daycare. That doesn't sound logical now, does it? The taxpayer should pay for my father's long-term care. The taxpayer should pay for this for me. The taxpayer should pay for that for me. That doesn't sound logical. It's easy to hide behind this shadowy government term. The government should pay for this. The government should pay for that. Yeah. The government pays for nothing. The taxpayer pays 100% of everything. 100% of everything. So you can have anything. I liken it to this. You can come to dinner and have anything on the menu you want, as long as you're willing to pay the bill at the end. So you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the bill. And if you're not, then that's the end of it. I think that everybody is free to pursue whatever lifestyle they want. Just don't send me the bill. Because if I'm financing your lifestyle, I should then have a say in your lifestyle.
Sure.
If I have to pay for people's kids' daycare, I should then have a say in how many kids you can have.
Otherwise, the population could theoretically run you dry of resources by continuing to.
Well, it's not just that. It's just that you can't tax some people and give them the responsibility of paying for things without having a voice. No taxation without representation. Wasn't that the big
Yeah.
cry that started the American Revolution? Well, I still believe that. No taxation without representation. If you want me to pay for something, I should have a say in how you conduct yourself. Here's a good example. In Canada, at least in Ontario, let's say you were going to go buy a bottle of vodka, a typical 750 ml bottle of vodka, or 26 ounces. It's going to be about, I think, 35, 40 bucks, because there's a huge amount of tax in there for the government because they know it has negative healthcare outcomes. But if you're in Florida, it's 10 bucks. Same bottle's 10 bucks. If you're going to be an alcoholic, I don't think there's a cheaper state to be in than Florida.
Oh.
Because suddenly it's easy, it's cheap to have that addiction. But because it's not in there, there is no, when the individual gets some kind of negative health outcomes because of too much alcohol, well, how can it be the taxpayer's problem? The taxpayer collected nothing for it.
Yeah.
It is your choice and purely your choice. But here, because we know that people will drink, we make them pay more in tax to drink than an otherwise other person would pay, simply because we know it has negative outcomes. Same with cigarettes. Since it has negative health outcomes, they end up paying more. So we can tax your free choice as opposed to restrict your free choice.